Okay. Welcome back to World History 1750 to 1914. Um, so, you might have noticed that I haven't been making videos recently for past weeks, and that's just because no one has been watching those. So, but then, this week we have kids who are interested in the stuff and who missed classes for one reason or another. So, um, so here we go. This time period is going to be mainly focused around revolutions, or at least that's what I'm going to be focusing on. And so, as you can probably tell from this picture of the revolution of a French Revolution in 1830. I mean, you've probably seen this painting before. I'm not a Michu, but also chop chop. All right. So this section is going to be about the Enlightenment. That's what this video is going to be about. And so the Enlightenment is not going to be the whole thing though, because we're also going to be talking about the medical revolution, which the sanitary revolution or sanitation revolution is just part of it. But essentially, these are two pretty big things in world history, not just European history, because they're going to really influence the world that we live in today. So here's like the area where the Enlightenment and the medical revolution occurs. But it's going to, I guess I should probably expand this circle out more. But just know that this is mainly going to start as a Western phenomenon, but it's going to go outwards. So, the Enlightenment. In past weeks, or last week, I talked about the trend towards individualism in European history, where the idea that you have to question traditions and that you have to start really thinking for yourself. And so the Enlightenment, which started last week, but we're talking about this week, is following in that tradition, because it's basically, you take the scientific revolution. Remember, that's like studying the world in order to find out like what things are true, rather than just taking what other people say at face value. The Enlightenment is applying that to things outside of just science. So it's like, how should we live our lives? How should we organize our government? And so what this is that the enlightened philosophers, what they do generally is they want to really emphasize reason rather than like emotion, and individualism over just tradition. And what they also want to do is they want to say that more people should be involved in the government. Like, the kings should no longer be gods, chosen on earth. They should be people or they, as part of the government, should be held responsible by the people that they govern. And that, so like, if there's a bad king, then you are allowed to rebel against them. You're not going to go to hell for that. And so though, remember, this is in very broad strokes, because there are enlightened philosophers who advocate or who argue for the exact opposite of this. But I'm just generally. There's also religious toleration, as in we're going to be seeing at least the upper classes drift a bit further away from traditional Christianity, and they're going to be going towards something called deism, which is just the belief that there is a God, but we don't really know how exactly that God works. I'm not going to be talking about empiricism versus mysticism, because that is a philosophical debate that I did try to explain in a past attempt to record this, but it kind of just fell apart. There's also kind of a push for equality, though this push for equality isn't really going to get started until way later. And so, like, when people who aren't a bunch of like white rich men can get involved in politics and things like that. But here's something that is also some good news though. So in the 1870s, we have the sanitary revolution, and this is like the biggest thing that you've never heard of. It's super duper important to how we live today, because back in say 1800 or 1200 or like 500 BC, cities were death traps, as in more people died in each city than were born. So the only way that cities grew were by getting more people to move into the city. And it's not like there weren't that many people being born, it's just there were a lot of people who were dying. And the reason behind that is because cities back then, before the sanitary revolution, were filled with garbage because there weren't any trash collectors. And I think you guys know what chamber pots are, but people would take the chamber pots and they dump them onto the street, uh, like potentially onto people. Everything was super dirty and filled with disease. And this all meant that there was an extremely high level of infant mortality, as in a lot of babies would die because there's just disease and disgusting stuff everywhere. So, what the sanitary revolution does is that uh, you change all of that. You separate your poop water from your drinking water, which is super important. You start uh, you have an actual garbage collector. Uh, oh boy, and like you get, uh, and you also get people who are tasked with like finding where diseases are spreading and stopping them from spreading. So these people are called epidemiologists. And so what they do is they map out outbreaks. They see, okay, maybe 50 people have gotten sick in this town, and they all got sick because of what place or what happened to make them sick. And then they find out that cause, and they try to shut down that cause or stop other people from doing similar things. So you can think of this as like, epidemiologists are the people who get us to do social distancing. There are people who get us to do hand washing too, because for not so that you don't infect other people. And they're the reason why COVID-19 didn't happen earlier. It's why a pandemic only happened like 100 years after the last global pandemic. Without epidemiologists, well, potentially, SARS, Ebola, swine flu, all those things could have ended up becoming major pandemics, but we had epidemiologists and they didn't. And then you can see what happens when you don't listen to epidemiologists today, with the way that China handled the early pandemic, or the early outbreaks in China, and the way that our government is ignored the pandemic at the start, and then is kind of insisting that it's not an issue now, which is bad, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you are on, because people are dying. Um, there's also vaccines, which aren't really part of the sanitary revolution, but they're also an invention that are sort of really important and happens around this time. Because remember, do you guys remember smallpox? Although I can't, you guys can't really respond to this, but let's say you remember smallpox. That was the disease that helped like wipe out 90% of the population of the Americas when the Europeans came over, and also just killed hundreds of millions of other people over the course of human history. But today, smallpox is gone. It's like completely been eradicated. And part of that is because like epidemiologists and all of this, but it's mainly because of vaccines, where you can get a much, much, much weakened version of a disease and then build immunity against it so you don't get sick from it. And before vaccinations and before all of this, 1/4 of kids died before they reached the age of 1, and half of kids died before they reached before the end of puberty. And that's pretty insane. And so this is why getting vaccines is so important, because when you're not, that's basically opening gaps for diseases to infect kids who are going to be the most vulnerable to these diseases, and would like die in extremely large numbers for something that's at this point in our lives completely avoidable. um, so yeah, thank you. That is going to be the first section of 1750 to 1914. You can like take a break, get some water, things like that. I hope you enjoy this, and please like ask me questions. I know it's like weird to email me. I feel weird about emailing my teachers a lot, but I'm just like I'm just a student. I can like totally answer your questions, and yeah, I'd have fun doing that. It's this has been a really fun experience for me. So thank you guys, and bye bye.